So my topic is my senior lecture. I'm a PGY4. My name is Wendy, and my topic is the adulteration of street cocaine. Special thanks to Dr. Smith and Dr. Wiener. So today we're going to go through the history of the modern cocaine trade business. We'll go through some of the cultivation, the distribution of cocaine, and also we'll explore the many political and economic factors that ultimately affect who we buy our cocaine from and what is actually in our cocaine. And then finally, I will help the members of the audience answer that very important burning question that they might have about their own cocaine, and that is my cocaine pure? So America is a country that loves its cocaine. We have 5 million active users, where we lead the world in cocaine consumption, and during the course of my lecture today in the US, there will be 360,000 lines of cocaine snorted. Maybe a little less because I'm going to try to end on time, but about that. So we'll start with this beautiful plant here. This is the Coca Plant. It is native to the western part of South America. 98% of the world's cocaine is found in 3 countries: Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. And actually in Bolivia and Peru, processing the coca plant is legal, and so people use it for chewing tobacco. They make tea out of it, like a mate. And also, how many people are from New Jersey in here at all? So New Jersey is the place where legal cocaine is made. They're the site of the legal cocaine distribution center for medical cocaine. And they also make the extract for, the non-cocaine extract for Coca-Cola products.
Yeah, Jersey.
Yeah. So after, when the plant's harvested, they spread out the leaves on these mats and they let them dry out under the sun. But this is really hard, back-breaking labor in the sun. So the workers tend to chew on the leaves, much like we might drink some coffee on our, or some Red Bull for a little extra pick-me-up while they're working. So that's pretty common. But it's not like they're actually taking cocaine. It's not the same thing. About 500 or 600 kilograms of the leaf is needed to make 1 kilogram of cocaine. So they're getting a really small little, like a sympathomimetic burst of energy there. So then after the leaves are dried out, the men stomp on the leaves in pits in the ground, and they add common chemicals like kerosene, sodium carbonate, water. They can add a lot of different things. Things can be substituted quite easily. And so this part of at this stage, it's pretty difficult for authorities to regulate because they can really put all sorts of chemicals on there to help turn it into the paste. The paste then goes to specialized labs, and then there are special chemicals that I won't go into, but they create first the base and then finally the cocaine hydrochloride. The product has to get out of the village, and get to a distribution center. So this is a picture of a mom strapping some cocaine to her child to help transport the cocaine outside of the village. This picture is of Buenaventura, which is a coastal city in Colombia, and it is actually the cocaine distribution center there. So they have no tourism. They really have little other business going on except for the drug business. So the government mostly leaves them alone, and what you'll see on the street is guerrillas, paramilitary, narcos, freely doing whatever they want. There's a lot of violence, and people will actually walk the street with their guns out in the open. The murder rate here is 36 times that in New York City, so it's a very dangerous place. This is the modern cocaine route. I know the numbers are kind of small, but we see that the cocaine, when you get it in Colombia, it's about $5,000 or $6,000 for that kilo of cocaine. And then as you pass up further and further towards the US, that price obviously increases to about a wholesale value of $25,000 to $50,000 per kilo in the United States. And I had said that 98% of the cocaine comes from South America, so if the cocaine is making it all the way to Australia, that kilo might go for up to $200,000. And this, I want to emphasize, this is the modern route where we take the land route up through Mexico. This is not actually the route that cocaine has always traveled by. So once it gets to its end users, it's used recreationally. So any kind of transmucosal use, snorting, oral mucosal use, rectal use, and Dr. Wiener pointed out some terms for the rectal use is booty bumping and keistering, which I didn't know. So apparently we can do that with it. It can be converted to its freebase form. I kind of wanted to show like a white guy smoking the crack, so it was not too hard to think of the former Toronto mayor. So it can be smoked as crack, and it provides a short but intense high. So now let's look a little bit at the history of cocaine. So throughout the 20th century, cocaine actually primarily came up through the Caribbean, and it came directly from the powerful Colombian cartels like the Medellin cartel, which led by Pablo Escobar. And they used ships and they used aircraft and basically went from Colombia to Miami. There was very little land travel through Mexico. And just as a side note, Escobar, at the height of his empire, he was worth $25 billion. So it was huge, huge business for the Colombians. And during this era, cocaine was pervasive. It was everywhere. So it was flowing freely in Miami. You'd see references of pop culture. People would be using it in the bathrooms. So it was really was the heyday of cocaine. But then the United States government started to notice that this was becoming a problem, and they invested money and political pressure to sort of force the Colombians to tackle their cocaine cartels. So they helped break up the major Colombian cartels, leading to a fracturing of the South American cocaine network. And this started to help Mexico to start to become a little bit more important in the cocaine trade as the Colombian networks began to be broken up. They had the United States provided increased DEA and Coast Guard support, so they also cracked down on the Colombians' aerial and maritime surveillance, so leading to more seizures. And then we had something called NAFTA, which can be called a true Trojan horse for narco traffickers, because NAFTA opened up the borders in Mexico. It let trucks, people, money, goods flow much easier across the border. So distributing it through a land route became more appealing. And so then the Mexican narcos actually started to have more control over the product. It became sort of the primary overseers of the cocaine business. We also had bank deregulation and privatization, so it became much easier to launder money in Mexico and in South America. And these were not small banks. These were like Wachovia, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. They're all like funnels to send back narco money. And an example would be in 1979, when the rest of the country was in recession. In the Miami banks, there was a $7 billion surplus in cash. Also, we have some more unintended effects of American policy. We did this aerial cocaine eradication, which ended in 2015. But basically, we supplied the helicopters and the chemicals, usually like a glyphosate, and we would spray about 500,000 Colombian coca fields a year to try to help eradicate their product. So, not surprisingly then, around like the 1990s, the Mexican cartels really began to dominate the cocaine trade, and their business model sort of differed from that of the Colombians. The Colombians, these big, old school sort of cartels, depended on consistency, long-term business relationships. But after those networks became disrupted and disbanded, then it was a lot of small shops, sort of like mom and pop shops, I guess you could say, family operated. But they would maybe be there one year, not there the next year, and it was really not as organized as the Colombian cartels. Also now, Colombia is still the location where the cocaine is primarily grown, but the Mexican middlemen we're taking more of the profit because they were handling so much of the distribution. So this put increased pressure on the Colombians to try to find a way to keep some of the profit for themselves. This graph is from the DEA. It just shows that the coca bush has been declining from 2003 to 2012. Blue is Colombia, and between 2007 and 2012, the coca bush production was actually halved. And the reason is a lot of the reasons I've said: the spraying, the increased crackdown, the breaking up of some of the organized crime there. And then concurrently, if you look at the red, this is the cost of a gram of cocaine in the US. And you can see that between the same years that the supply went down, obviously the cost of the gram of cocaine went up. And then other things that tell us that there was more pressure within the cocaine market are that people, I mean, take it with a grain of salt because it's self-reported, but people that said they used cocaine, that number went down. There was fewer people who tested positive for cocaine in the workforce. The purity level, the percentage of purity went down, and there were fewer DEA seizures. So when we put this all together and we look at the current cocaine trade like around this time period, it's a fragmented market now. It's no longer centralized, in Colombia. There's decreased quality control with the random mom and pop shops springing up. There's decreased supply. There's decreased Coca plants to start with, and there are now these Mexican middlemen that are helping to distribute through Central America, in Mexico, into the US instead of flying directly from Colombia to Florida. So this might be, you might be thinking this is like a sad day for cocaine and singing the cocaine blues right now. But there are also some other factors at play. So one is the psychology of the cocaine user. So there's a study, this is, I want to include some evidence-based stuff in this presentation. So there was a study in 2006 of cocaine users, and they wanted to know what the users thought about the quality of their cocaine. And so, so basically, most of the cocaine was adulterated, and actually their average cocaine was only 22% pure, but only about 12% of the users thought that there was any sort of problem with their cocaine, that there was any adulterant. The other people thought, the other 88% thought they had pure cocaine. And things that affected their perception of the cocaine was how much they paid for it, where they supposedly bought it from, how they used it. So basically, this sort of shows that cocaine users do not have the most discriminating taste. The psychology of the dealer is also important. So people might think that that the dealers put in any sort of toxic substance they could find, like cleaning products, ground glass. But the reality is that they're businessmen, and you have to balance profit with customer satisfaction and repeat customers. So really, it's probably better to avoid overtly toxic adulterants that will kill your customer. Okay, so I keep talking about additives and adulterants, but it's more specific than that, and I kind of want to go through the two major categories. So first, there are dilutants. Dilutants are pharmacologically inactive. They are cheap, readily available, and they're usually added at the later stages of distribution because it's, when you're having illegal drugs crossing the border, you want to have as small volume as possible to minimize the risk. But then once you're into the States, then you add these sort of bulking agents to it to try to increase your profit. And these can actually be added multiple times. So like small time dealer to smaller time dealer to smaller time dealer, they can each just add in extra bulking agents: flour, sugar, baking soda, chalk. More sophisticated are the adulterants, which are pharmacologically active, and they often mimic or enhance the effect of the drug. They're usually more expensive than the dilutants, but they should be cheaper than the drug, obviously, because their whole point is to maximize your drug profit. And actually, at lower doses, they may be less harmful to the user than the drug itself. And the reason, so what supports this theory of the sort of like the philosophy behind the adulterants is that if they do large cocaine busts, like at the airport of origin, they'll find that all the samples have the same percentage, same like grade, same exact like chemical composition of the adulterant. And then also there will be, like say there's multiple like worldwide seizures, they'll see like, oh, like in, you know, like in Europe and in the US and in Australia, they all have the same like additive, and they can trace it back and see that it was produced in the same lab. So that's how we know that the adulterants are added at the very, very sort of early stage of the distribution chain. So, so what would make a good adulterant? We kind of talked about it. You don't want the person to know that you're adulterating their cocaine, so it should pass like a basic sort of look test. Enhances or mimics the effects. And sometimes it makes the mode of administration easier. An example of this would be with caffeine, because it facilitates the smoking of cocaine because it has a lower lower temperature for vaporization. So sometimes they actually make the drug work even better in a way. So some of the additives, it was less sophisticated in the 1980s. It was like mostly sugars and lidocaine. But nowadays we see these additives. Phenacetin gets metabolized to acetaminophen. So it has similar physical properties, similar analgesic properties. Caffeine, it also happens to be an alkaloid like cocaine, so you get that bitter taste. It, obviously we know it has some stimulant effects, so it sort of mimics the effect of the cocaine. And then I mentioned that it improves the smokability too, so that is a pretty good additive. Levamisole, I have a dedicated slide for. Diltiazem has some dedicated slides, so we'll skip those for now. Hydroxyzine is a first-generation antihistamine and also has some anxiolytic properties. And then lidocaine has some like local anesthetic properties, so they taste it and they say, oh, it makes my mouth numb. It must be, you know, cocaine. In 2009, when the DEA did analysis of cocaine sampled, when it leaves Colombia, it's around, they say 85, Colombia National Police say 85% pure, our DEA says 65% pure, so there's some like discrepancy, but it's fairly pure. And then almost 70% were cut with Levamisole, 9% with Diltiazem. So these were the two sort of most common high-level adulterants that we saw. And then by the time it gets to the street, it's about 30% pure. So let's talk about Diltiazem. So Diltiazem has been shown in cocaine-addicted rats to decrease drug cravings. In humans, it might prolong the cocaine high. I mean, you can produce more pleasure with less pure cocaine. And then in animal studies, it's been shown to blend some of the negative effects of cocaine, the inotropic effects, the increase in systemic vascular resistance, and it's also been protective against MI and dysrhythmia. However, if the person is in heart failure from the cocaine, then adding on Diltiazem would obviously make that worse. And then there's a great statement in Circulation when they're talking about management of cocaine-associated chest pain. And it says that calcium channels are not first line, but you try the benzos, you can try some nitro, and it can be considered. So it's actually sort of like a second-line medication for cocaine chest pain. Further evidence that it's maybe why it was selected for an adulterant is that there was a small double-blind placebo-controlled study, and basically the volunteers were given pre-treatment. There were 2 sessions. They were given pre-treatment with Diltiazem and then cocaine, and then at a different session they were just given cocaine. And they asked them a lot of different things about how they felt and measured their blood pressure, heart rate, and basically both times they felt equally as high, equally as like great. But when they took the Diltiazem, they didn't have the goosebumps, the like negative like pylo sort of erection feeling, and so they were actually more comfortable when they had a little bit of Diltiazem in their cocaine. Levamisole, we see that in 2005, basically before 2005, it's in red. It was almost non-existent, and then by the time we reached 2009, it was in about 70% of every cocaine sample, and volume-wise, it comprised 10% of the sample. So we went from not being there at all to pervasively like an all cocaine, and like a pretty significant quantity of the cocaine was Levamisole. So just a little bit about Levamisole. So it was previously used for rheumatoid arthritis and certain cancers, as well as a sort of non-steroidal alternative to pediatric nephrotic syndrome in Europe. Now it's used as a deworming agent by veterinarians. And Levamisole really came, as far as like it being introduced to the cocaine world, the story really starts in 2004. There was a controversy in the race horsing world because a lot of reputable trainers who had long distinguished careers were accused of doping their horses with amphetamines, an amphetamine called Aminerex, which is a stimulant, because their horses were testing positive for this substance. And the trainer said, no, we didn't do any doping, we followed the rules. And what scientists later found out was that these horses had been injected with Levamisole for deworming, and their bodies metabolized the Levamisole to Aminerex, the amphetamine. So this got people sort of excited. This is kind of, I didn't want to get too much into the biochemistry, but so cocaine is a MAO transport inhibitor. Amphetamines are MAO releasers, and Levamisole is actually very lipophilic, so it readily penetrates the blood-brain barrier. It's been shown in both animal and human models to have amphetamine-like qualities. And then I think importantly, you have to consider the half-life too of cocaine and Levamisole, Aminerex. So cocaine, the half-life is about 45 minutes, and then you start to come down. In Levamisole, the half-life is 4 to 16 hours. And so long after your high from the cocaine goes down, you have this sort of prolonged amphetamine, nice, pleasurable feeling. So these are some of the reasons why Levamisole is the most popular adulterant in the past 2 decades. But there are even more reasons why it's such a popular adulterant. I already alluded to the synergy, how it enhances some of the cocaine feelings. It's visually similar, so you get this sort of white, iridescent, sort of fish scale sheen to the cocaine that doesn't involve like broken glass, so it looks similar. It has a similar melting point, 187 degrees Fahrenheit. This is one of the common street tests that they do to see if their cocaine is pure. They try to melt it, see what temperature it melts at, and see if it's 187 degrees. It can be cracked washed. So this is really, really important. So when you're making crack from cocaine, there's a process where you're converting it basically, and when this process causes most of the impurities and cutting agents to be filtered out. So if you bought a kilogram of cocaine, what you thought was cocaine, and then you crack washed it, and you end up with a very, very small amount of product, you would be really upset. And people might even be, killed for that. But with Levamisole, it actually survives the crack washing process. So whatever you put in there, when they make the crack out of it, it stays in there, and so you're like, okay, this seems good. This seems like I'm getting my money's worth. It passes the bleach test. So bleach test is another street test, and basically you add cocaine to some Clorox bleach, and pure cocaine dissolves. There's no sedimentation and there's no discoloration. But most of the other adulterants, and definitely like the dilutants, they would cause discoloration, cause sedimentation. But Levamisole stays clear and the bleach stays clean looking. So typically smugglers would want to move the purest product along as possible to mitigate the risk of detection. And that is the sort of traditional drug smuggling model. But Levamisole behaves enough like cocaine where high-level distribution can cut their kilos with the cocaine and pass it for basically 100% pure. And also, Levamisole is readily available in the Coca region, thanks partially to agricultural subsidies by the US. So when they look at the Levamisole, at least in the earlier parts of the 2000s, most of the Levamisole was US manufactured pharmaceutical grade. So we were the ones that gave it to them. A little bit about some negative sides to Levamisole, because I've spent a lot of time talking about all of its positive qualities. You can get something called lines, which people say is a vasculitis, but it's really a small vessel thrombosis that sort of looks like a vasculitis. It primarily affects the ears, the arms, and the legs with relative sparing of the trunk. You can get some autoantibodies similar to lupus, like positive ANA, positive antibodies to cardiolipin. And then along with that, you get some arthralgias, myalgias. One of the more severe side effects would be agranulocytosis. So Levamisole has a reactive thiol group, and reactive thiol groups trigger sort of cytotoxic responses. And then this can lead to destruction of white blood cells, leading to agranulocytosis and neutropenia. It's only in 3 to 10% of patients, but but it can be quite severe. So if you suspect someone in the ED with lines and they have the sort of classic clinical cutaneous manifestations, and then there's some sort of cocaine use, which could be suspected, confirmed, they might tell you. And I will say that with on the urine test, if they have a negative urine test, that doesn't really mean anything, because the benzoylecgonine, which is the metabolite of cocaine, only stays positive for 72 hours in the urine. So if they say it, if you think that they do it, you don't have to wait for the detox to come back. Then it's recommended to send CBC to look for the agranulocytosis and neutropenia. And then because other things on the differential besides Lyme disease would be like different vasculitis or different autoimmune processes, you could send some of these other studies to help your colleagues if the patient is going to be following up with them. The management is stopping the drug, and it takes about a month for the skins to start to improve, although if there's a lot of damage, they might need skin grafts. It takes up to a year for those autoantibodies, or those antibodies to go away. And most of the time, this can be managed as an outpatient, but if they have systemic infection and they're neutropenic, then obviously you would treat them like a neutropenic fever person. All right, and then finally now is mind cocaine cure.
Wendy?
Yeah.
Once they've had lines, anytime they're exposed to the
Levamisole?
will it come back? Or is it they can have it once and then go back to using it and be okay?
So that I don't know. I mean, out of patients that end up developing lines, it's in the low. Of like 100% regular users, the number is very, very low. Like 2-3% will actually develop lines, but I don't know if you have sort of like a propensity towards it if you stop and then restart again. That's a good question. So for your cocaine at home, they do sell cocaine testing kits. They're expensive. They're like $50 a testing kit. And it doesn't tell you how much, what the purity is. It just tells you what's in it. Although they do offer another test that tells you the purity but not what's in it. And so if you order both together for like $100, then you could know if the cocaine you bought is what's in it and how much real cocaine it is. There's a chemistry lab in Barcelona where you can send smell-proof envelopes in, and they test anonymous samples from all over the world, and then we'll report back to you the drug safety and purity. This is paid for by Bitcoin, and I like this part. The volunteers are mostly medical students in Barcelona, and they're the ones that handle the cocaine and test them, whatever that means. Exactly. I heard it's very popular. So then there's home testing. So there's the melting point, the solubility, the color. There's just what you think. Do you think it's good? But as I've shown, these are all really, really unreliable, especially with very like adulterants like Levamisole. So at the end of the day, you know, the adulterants may be actually less likely to kill you. They may be less harmful than the drug itself. And sometimes maybe you're better off just not knowing what's in your cocaine or not if it makes you happy. So ignorance might be bliss. And these are my, oh, it's not messed up. Here's a lot of references. I don't know why that fixed. Not like that. And that's it. I can take any questions. I tried to rush a little bit just so we could end on.
Very good. Very nice. So there's a special faculty board review given by our vice chair, Dr. Holt, on skin emergencies. I've seen it.